The late afternoon light spilled through the slanted blinds of Ethan Miller's bedroom, painting slow-moving stripes across the carpet. The air hummed with the quiet stillness of summer, the kind of silence that made every sound feel amplified. A faucet dripped from the adjoining bathroom, the creak of the floor beneath his bare feet, the soft rustle of cotton as he tugged a fresh shirt from his suitcase that he had been home from university for 3 days, and already, the walls of his father's house felt smaller than memory had promised. The pictures lining the hallway hadn't changed, his father shaking hands with colleagues, his mother's faded smile from a life that ended too soon, but Ethan had. He was 22 now, still unsure of who he was, but certain he couldn't return to the obedient son this house once contained. That he stood in front of the mirror, hair damp, towel still hanging around his waist. He didn't hear the front door open, or the familiar baritone calling his father's name. He only heard the click of his bedroom door handle a second before it turned. "Robert? You here?" The voice stopped. Ethan froze, eyes darting toward the doorway. There, framed by the soft yellow light of the hallway, stood Daniel Ross, his father's oldest friend. "Daniel?" Ethan stammered. Daniel blinked, his expression a mix of surprise and something unreadable. "Oh, God, Ethan. I didn't realize, your dad said you'd be out." His voice stumbled, though his gaze didn't move away quickly enough. Ethan felt his pulse rise to his throat. He reached for the shirt beside him, fumbling to pull it on. "He's not home," he said, his words sharper than intended. Daniel stayed where he was, hand still on the doorknob. "I'm sorry," he murmured, though he didn't step back. His eyes flicked away, then returned, as if caught between manners and something involuntary. "You look different. Taller, older." Ethan gave a faint, nervous laugh. "That happens when you leave for university." Daniel smiled, a brief thing that softened the tension but didn't dissolve it. "You've got your father's shoulders," he said, and then, realizing the awkwardness of the comment, added quickly, "I was just dropping off some paperwork for him. I didn't mean to intrude." "It's fine," Ethan said, though his chest still thudded too fast. He noticed things he hadn't before. Daniel's fitted shirt rolled at the sleeves, the way the late light touched the gray at his temples. His father's friend had always seemed unreachable, a man of composure, good humor, and quiet authority. But standing there now, uncertain, his presence felt different, less assured, more human. Daniel cleared his throat, finally stepping back a little. "You've really grown up, Ethan. I remember when you were barely tall enough to reach the table." Ethan smiled despite the strange heaviness of the moment. "That feels like a long time ago." "It was," Daniel said softly. "Time does that. It moves too fast when you're not looking." For a second, the air between them stilled. Daniel's gaze lingered, too long, too steady. Something unspoken flickered there, something Ethan couldn't quite name. He felt both seen and vulnerable under it. Then Daniel blinked, as if waking from a thought. "I should go," he said, voice rougher now. "Tell your father I stopped by." Ethan nodded, unable to find the right words. Daniel's footsteps retreated down the hall, then faded entirely with the sound of the front door closing. Silence returned, heavier than before. Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, shirt half buttoned, heart still pacing unevenly. He told himself it had been nothing, just an awkward mistake, a few misplaced words. Yet he couldn't shake the look Daniel had given him, or the warmth that had crept beneath his skin. That he turned toward the mirror again. The reflection that stared back didn't look like the boy who'd left for university. It looked like someone uncertain of what had just happened, and unsettled by how much it mattered. From outside, the hum of a car engine faded into distance. Ethan exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair. The house seemed to hold its breath with him, as though it too knew something unspoken had shifted in its quiet rooms. That he glanced toward the door Daniel had left ajar, its faint swing still visible, and whispered to himself, barely audible, why didn't he leave sooner? The question hung there, unanswered, stretching its shadow into the evening that followed. The house came alive again that evening, as if pretending nothing had shifted within its walls. Robert Miller's voice carried from the kitchen, low, practical, commanding, while Daniel's laughter joined in, smoother, practiced, slightly too bright. From his room upstairs, Ethan listened to the two men talk as though the afternoon had never happened. He told himself it hadn't, yet every sound of Daniel's voice stirred that same, confusing pulse beneath his ribs. When he finally descended the stairs, both men were seated at the table, dinner half finished, glasses of wine glowing in the soft light. His father greeted him with his usual gruff warmth. "You remember Daniel, don't you?" Ethan nodded, keeping his tone light. "Hard to forget." Daniel's eyes flickered toward him briefly, then away. "Glad you joined us. Your father was just telling me about your coursework. Psychology, isn't it?" "Yeah," Ethan said, sitting down. "People fascinate me. What makes them choose one thing over another? The quiet reasons behind it all." Daniel's smile wavered. "You sound like a man who's already seen too much." Robert chuckled. "He's seen nothing but textbooks. Don't let him fool you." The conversation flowed easily, but beneath the surface, a strange awareness hummed. Ethan felt Daniel's occasional glances, fleeting but deliberate, like tiny sparks across a dark room. Once, when their hands brushed reaching for the same bottle of wine, Daniel pulled back too quickly. Robert didn't notice, absorbed in recounting a story from work, his words a steady backdrop of normality. When the dishes were cleared and his father began packing a small overnight bag, Ethan realized Daniel wasn't leaving. "Road trip early in the morning," Robert said casually. "Daniel's staying over. Saves him the drive back tonight." "Oh," Ethan managed. "Guest room's still made up." "Good." His father smiled, distracted, already thinking ahead to tomorrow's meeting. He clapped Daniel on the shoulder before heading upstairs. "You two behave yourselves." The joke landed heavier than it should have. Moments later, the front door closed behind Robert, and the house fell into an unfamiliar stillness. The air smelled faintly of wine and rain from an approaching storm. Ethan wandered into the living room, unsure why he couldn't simply go to bed. Daniel was there, sitting on the couch, glass in hand, his tie loosened, his composure unraveling slightly at the edges. "Couldn't sleep?" Daniel asked, voice low. "Wasn't trying yet," Ethan replied, sitting across from him. The soft hum of the ceiling fan filled the space between words. Daniel swirled the wine in his glass. "You know, your father talks about you all the time. Says you've got a good head, that you'll do better than he ever did." "That's generous of him," Ethan said, then after a pause, "He doesn't say much of that to me." Daniel glanced at him, something gentle in his eyes. "He's proud. Just not fluent in showing it." Ethan gave a half-smile. "Guess I inherited that from him." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, just deep, layered with things neither of them dared voice. Rain began tapping against the windows, the first hints of the storm rolling closer. Daniel sighed. "I used to think I had life figured out. Marriage, career, the right friends, the right house. But somewhere along the line, I stopped asking if I was happy." Ethan looked at him, studying the quiet fatigue in his features. "Are you?" Daniel met his gaze. "Tonight, I'm not sure what I am." The honesty in his voice pulled something loose inside Ethan. He leaned back, unsure whether to fill the silence or surrender to it. Instead, he asked softly, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" Daniel hesitated. "Every day," he said. "But then someone reminds you who you used to be. And for a moment, you feel like that person again." His eyes lifted to Ethan's, steady now, no trace of pretense. Ethan felt the air grow heavier. The rain outside deepened to a steady rhythm, the only sound daring to interrupt them. He could hear his own heartbeat, uneven, expectant. "You should get some rest," Daniel said finally, though his tone lacked conviction. "So should you," Ethan answered, but neither moved. The clock in the hallway ticked louder, measuring their hesitation. Daniel's fingers tightened around his glass. Ethan's breath caught, uncertain whether to stand or speak. Daniel exhaled, a sound almost like surrender. "You remind me," he said quietly, "of what I wanted to be before I learned how to pretend." For a moment, they both simply existed, two men caught between years of difference and the same ache of loneliness. Ethan rose slowly. "Good night, Daniel," he said, though it didn't sound like goodbye. Daniel's eyes followed him as he walked toward the stairs. "Good night, Ethan," he murmured, the words weighted with everything they hadn't said. At the top step, Ethan paused and glanced back. Daniel was still there, motionless, his face half lit by the flickering lamp. Something in that image, quiet, vulnerable, irrevocable, imprinted itself in Ethan's mind that he turned away, heart thudding, realizing that whatever line existed between curiosity and desire had already begun to blur. The storm broke sometime after midnight. Rain swept against the windows, soft at first, then relentless, drumming the roof like a warning that came too late. Ethan lay awake, eyes open to the faint light leaking under his door. Sleep felt impossible. Every thought circled back to the same point, the way Daniel's voice had faltered, the truth that had slipped out between them like a confession neither meant to share. That he turned over, restless. The house creaked with the shifting wind. Then came a soft sound, footsteps in the hall, slow, hesitant. Ethan sat up. The faint shadow beneath his door paused, then moved again. A quiet knock followed. "Ethan." Daniel's voice. Low. "Careful." Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah," he said, though he wasn't sure why. The door opened a few inches. Daniel stood there, wearing a t-shirt and loose trousers, his hair slightly mussed, face unreadable in the dim light. He looked older than he had earlier, tired, maybe even remorseful. "Sorry," Daniel began, his voice nearly drowned by the rain. "Couldn't sleep." "The storm," Ethan nodded. "Me neither." For a moment, they just stood there, two shapes framed in the thin blue light of the hallway. Then Daniel stepped inside, closing the door behind him as if to shield them from something neither dared to name. Ethan sat at the edge of his bed while Daniel remained standing near the dresser, his hand resting on it as if for balance. The air between them seemed fragile, electric. "I shouldn't have said what I did earlier," Daniel said quietly. "It was selfish." Ethan shook his head. "You were honest." "That's not always the same thing." The reply lingered, heavy and true. Ethan watched Daniel's reflection in the mirror, his shoulders drawn, his gaze lowered. A man used to being composed, now unraveling by degrees. "You think too much," Ethan murmured. Daniel almost smiled. "And you think too little." That small exchange, half jest, half truth, broke the distance between them. Daniel crossed the room slowly, as though testing the ground beneath each step. When he stopped in front of Ethan, neither spoke. The rain filled the silence, steady, rhythmic, intimate. Ethan could smell the faint trace of whiskey and rain on Daniel's skin. He looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes. What he saw there wasn't lust, it was loneliness, the kind that had been waiting for someone to notice. "I keep telling myself to walk out that door," Daniel whispered. "Then why don't you?" Daniel's breath caught. "Because you asked that." Neither moved first, yet somehow the distance vanished. There was no dramatic gesture, no sudden rush, just closeness, quiet and inevitable. When Daniel's hand brushed Ethan's shoulder, it was cautious, trembling, a question more than a touch. Ethan didn't pull away. For a long time, there was only the rain, their breathing, and the soft ache of wanting something that shouldn't be wanted. The moment was faceless, defined not by what was seen, but by what was felt, the weight of longing, the warmth of another heartbeat too near. Then, just as suddenly, it was over. The space between them returned, the world reclaiming its shape. Daniel drew back, his hand falling away. His face was unreadable, caught between guilt and tenderness. "I shouldn't have come in," he said, voice frayed. "Maybe not," Ethan answered softly. "But you did." Daniel exhaled, shaking his head, eyes bright with something like regret. "Your father trusts me. I've already broken enough promises." Ethan wanted to say something, anything to anchor the moment, to tell Daniel he understood, or that he didn't blame him, but the words refused to form. Daniel turned toward the door, pausing only once. "Don't let this define you," he said, his back still to Ethan. "It's just a mistake we both needed to make to know who we are." And then he was gone, the door closed with a whisper, leaving behind the faint scent of rain and something Ethan would never name aloud. That he sat in silence until dawn. The storm passed, leaving the house washed clean, but the quiet felt different now, too aware, too full. When he finally rose, the guest room was empty. Daniel's car was gone. Only a half-finished glass of water on the counter remained. Catching the morning light, Ethan stood at the window, watching the wet street glisten. His father's car pulled into the driveway a few hours later, the day resuming its familiar rhythm. Robert stepped out, calling his name cheerfully, unaware of what had shifted in his absence. Ethan answered, voice steady. Yet beneath it, something had changed, an understanding, an ache, a truth that wouldn't fade. That he looked once more at the door Daniel had left through and whispered, almost to himself, some moments don't end. They just wait for you to remember them. Outside, the storm clouds thinned, letting the first clean light of morning spill across the quiet house.